Back in the day, once upon a time, you could listen to a radio station with a live DJ. I think most of us here remember that, right? Most of us adults do, right? And the DJ at least had a little bit of control over the programming. I'm sure many of you had a favorite DJ on some radio station somewhere. I remember one of mine. Actually, it was two guys on that show, and well, they referred to what they unflatteringly referred to as TMJ syndrome. TMJ syndrome, right? They'd bring this up on occasion when someone was perhaps in the news being interviewed, and the person had often suffered some great tragedy, whether that was the news story, the person that was being interviewed had suffered some great tragedy. And then in the midst of whatever the person had been asked about, right, well, that person, the interviewee, would just drift and wander in the conversation to suddenly talking about Jesus and the power of Jesus and how they had Jesus and everything is fine in their life now that they had Jesus and so on. The radio show hosts mockingly referred to these non sequitur, absent-minded, and on occasion drug-fueled digressions in the conversations as TMJ, too much Jesus. The point here isn't to indulge in other people's blasphemy and ridicule, or shall we say flights of fancy or illusion. The point is to turn our attention to the idea of rejoicing in the midst of suffering. Is it possible? What does it mean? How do we do it? Or is self-deception, make-believe, the only option for us? Now, our Easter theme, Grit and Grace, you see it there on the screen, is inspired by what St. Peter, our namesake, wrote in his first letter there in the Bible, chapter 4. We heard this last week. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But listen how he continues. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. I don't think St. Peter suffered or was deceived by TMJ. But for too long, we middle-class Christians have lived lives of comfort and ease. We might even say laziness when it comes to the gospel. But as C.S. Lewis, the great author, put it, I didn't go to religion to make me happy. I always knew a bottle of port would do that. If you want a religion to make you feel really comfortable, I certainly don't recommend Christianity. See, the kind of faithfulness that's called for here, it's called for with St. Peter's letter that C.S. Lewis alludes to, is one that's full of grit and grace. Stick-to-itiveness, right? Resilience, hardiness, right? The kind of thing that trusts that God is in charge, and as we say in the small catechism, that he provides me richly and daily with all that I need, protects me from all danger, and guards me from all evil. See, gritty Christianity meets today's struggles head on, not retreating into platitudes and respectability. It conquers these challenges because Jesus, in his death and resurrection, has already defeated our great enemies of sin, death, and the devil. The Leo Tolstoy novel, Anna Karenina, famously begins, all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. But Tolstoy is cribbing from the great philosopher Aristotle. See, when success occurs, in this case a happy family, all of its necessary elements are present. And yet failure comes when just any one necessary thing is absent. One way to succeed, countless ways to fail. Now, applied to our theme today, there's many paths to regret, lamentation, grousing, murmuring, complaining, bemoaning, and the like. Rejoicing has one path. And already we're getting a clue as to what St. Peter means in verse 6. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials. Our rejoicing is not about our suffering. How could it be? God calls his creation good, and yet sin has corrupted it to its core. Suffering was never God's intention for his creation. That's why he sent his only begotten Son, so that new life beyond sin and death and the devil could flourish. To rejoice in suffering is to rejoice in the middle of suffering. Not to indulge the suffering, not to pander to platitudes, not to coddle with self-deception. Right? Sort of like that meme you see on the internet, the cartoon dog's in the room on fire, and he says to himself, "This is fine." No, what is the "this" to which St. Peter refers? It's this long sentence, verses 3 to 5. He has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you. By God's power, you are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. This, born again in Jesus, a heavenly inheritance, and guarded by God through faith. So let's take that one piece at a time. Born again in Jesus. No longer are we merely children of a fallen humanity, descended from those original sinners, Adam and Eve, with death as our only option in this valley of tears. Through baptism, we are reborn and renamed as children of God. It's through faith then, right, trusting, knowing, giving allegiance, not our own willpower, that we become children of this promise. That is, his promise of new life comes to us only by faith, not by good behavior, not by willpower. And instead, it's this new life that radically transforms those things, right? Willpower and good behavior for God's purposes. A heavenly inheritance. This is not some vague idea that someday some things will be some better somewhere out there. It's a restatement of what Jesus says in John chapter 14. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. As sons and daughters of the Father, right? Princes and princesses in his kingdom, it is our birthright to live with him in it. St. Peter says it's kept up in heaven, which invokes the idea of like a safe storage vault or something, which is an okay way to think about it, but it's in heaven because it is heaven, which is nothing less than life fully in the presence of God, without anything to come between us and him. And guarded by God through faith. That's our third thing. Now, we could misunderstand this. We could think that it's our faith that causes God's power to protect us. No faith, no power, more faith, more power, so we'll just keep on grinding and leveling up. But that's incorrect. Right? Our faithfulness or faithlessness neither limits nor amplifies God's power. But it's faith, trusting God, knowing God, being allegiant to God, giving allegiance to him, that receives from him. Faith is the ability to receive from God what God offers. Grace, mercy, and love, forgiveness, new life, and salvation, and so forth. Faith is that connection to God that begins to transform, as we already noted, our willpower and our good behavior and the like. Faith also transforms our perception. It lifts our eyes above our immediate surroundings, above the horizon, above the hills, all the way up to see God coming in his power, even in the most subtle ways. I visited a guy at the hospital who was visiting another guy at the hospital, and he could see that I was a pastor and he wanted to talk. And as we got to talking, I suggested to him that something occurred at the right place and the right time, and in that, he found a subtle nudge from God that was needed and welcome. It lifted his eyes up to see God at work. Well, so what about rejoicing? Right? We've considered that foundation. Now let's build on it. By the way, sometimes rejoicing, that word doesn't feel like the right word in our context. Feels like one of those words that's locked up at church all the time. It's not used in speech and everyday life. But anyway, let's see if we can find some insights about rejoicing. So let's consider likewise 3 components of rejoicing. First, it's in making praise. No, not that sappy Jesus love song on the radio stuff. None of that. See, praise comes in finding and seeing the grace in something. Right, like that guy I mentioned a minute ago, right? Right time, right place. And it's in a moment, right? It's often found in a moment, not a 2-week summit, but a moment of quiet and unhurriedness. It's in naming the things that are worthy, delightful. It's quite simply good in the biblical sense, right? That's praise. Rejoicing comes, believe it or not, from making things smaller. It's like a microscope. Things that are smaller suddenly appear larger, giving them more attention, more specificity, being surprised by a bit of wonder that this thing was just so. Remember, not one little sparrow is forgotten before God. That's 2. So number 3 then is reconnecting with God, plugging back in. We're tempted to chase around, to chase our tails, be on a wild goose chase in search of novelty, or bigger is better. We're out of scarcity. We find ourselves dashing around because it's not there, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there, it's not over there. Not running around more and more unfocused and frantic. Right? That's not going to reconnect with God. Stop. Just stop. Remember God's promises to be with us in word and sacrament, right? And the assembly of fellow baptized, beloved believers. Return to Him. Return to Him just where He says He is already waiting and watching for you to come home to Him. So that leaves verses 7 and 9 for us. So that the tested genuineness of your faith may be found to result in praise and glory. And you believe in Him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible, obtaining the outcome of your faith, salvation. This isn't too much Jesus. This is the nitty-gritty of faith for everyday life. Now, grit doesn't mean misery and doom, the last stop before full nihilism in the face of misery and doom. Grit is resilience, it's hardiness, it's what's needed to hang tough in the face of challenge and struggle. No, it doesn't make things easy with one weird trick as you see on the internet. Gritty Christianity is fueled by the very rejoicing we just considered. Gritty faithfulness is eyes lifted, trusting and knowing that they will see the one whom they love. Grit comes from joy. It's not caused by suffering. It results from salvation. We keep after it in everyday life, putting one foot in front of the other, conquering challenges, fighting dragons, rescuing hostages, reclaiming treasure, and all the like. And we do so because Jesus has called us and sent us to plant His kingdom's flag in everyday life. That's not TMJ syndrome. That's a living hope, guarded by God's power, rejoicing in His glory. That's simply the outcome of having been saved for the sake of His kingdom. Amen.